Okay, we should be live. Yeah, it looks like we are. Yeah, we're gonna continue the video we were doing earlier. I was just like, it was like 2 hours in, and I was like kind of starving, so I ended it. But we're gonna probably finish this, and I have another video queued up on Zen, which should be interesting. I think Zen's like a fairly fun topic to talk about. So, it's pretty simple too, and I feel like it has a lot of practical benefits, and it's something that if you understand a lot of philosophy in general, because really Stoicism is just Zen. Really, Transcendentalism is just Zen. Like there's a lot of carryover. Even Schopenhauer, to a certain extent, you can understand through understanding Taoism or Zen Buddhism.
I came across uh, a paper written by the German historian Dietrich, who had dealt with the so-called Mithras literature, a part of the great Parisian sorcerer Papyrus. And there he
So if you weren't here earlier, the story he's telling is basically there was this guy that had schizophrenia, and he was describing the outside world in terms of old alchemical symbols, more or less. You can call it whatever you want, but and he's basically saying that he saw these same symbols. That's what he's saying. That's the context of.
produced the uh, a part of the so-called Mithras liturgy. Namely, it is said there, after the second prayer, thou wilt see how the disk of the sun unfolds. And you will see hanging down from it the tube, the origin of the wind. And when you move thy face to the regions of the east, it will move there. And if you move your face to the region of the west, it will follow you.
Again, it's the same story. Um, yeah, he's gonna get into some more interesting
And incidentally,
prophecies.
I know, and you, now this is it. This is the vision of my patient.
But how could you be sure that your patient wasn't unconsciously recalling something that somebody had told him in
Oh
the past?
no, quite out of question, because that thing was not known. It was in a magic papyrus in Paris, and it wasn't even published. It was only published 4 years later after I had observed it with my patient.
So this is fundamental to a lot of Jung's work, is that there's things that we know that we have no right to know, and it's somewhat that there's this deeper layer of intelligence or the psyche or the collective unconscious, even call it that, sort of ties us together. There's a set or a baseline level of human knowledge that we can tap into at times. And it's think of people that are schizophrenic, they're very in tune with those sorts of things. They see things, they almost have like, to their detriment, they almost have this like intuition that is on steroids, I guess you could say.
And this you felt proved that there was an unconscious which was something more than personal.
Oh, well, that was not a proof to me, but it was a hint. And I took the hint.
Yes. Now, tell me, how did you first decide to start your work on the psychological types? Was that also as a result of some particular clinical experience?
Uh, Less so, it was a very personal reason, namely to do justice to the psychology of Freud, also to that of Adler, and to find my own bearings. Uh, that helped me to understand why Freud developed such a theory, or why Adler developed his theory, his.
So he's talking about Freud. Obviously, we talked about Freud for about an hour earlier, but the other name he just mentioned is Alfred Adler, who was, there's really at the genesis of psychology, there's really three names. It's Freud, Adler, and Jung. And Adler's not as well known, and particularly it's because he was somewhat like Socratic in his style. Like he didn't necessarily enjoy writing as much as the other two, and in fact, he wasn't as good of a writer as the other two. So in certain ways, it's very limiting to continue your legacy because you can't push it forward yourself. You don't have that same level of authority with your word, and it's interesting to see how you know these three figures have such a large impact on not just us as individuals, but our society as a whole, because they really do influence a major aspect of the way we view consciousness.
Power principle.
Have you concluded what psychological type you are yourself?
Naturally, I have devoted a great deal of attention to that painful question, you know.
And reached a conclusion?
Well, you see, the type is nothing static. It changes in the course of life. But I most certainly was characterized by thinking. I always thought, from early childhood on. And I
What is my
had a
camera
great deal
doing?
of intuition too. And I had a
Hopefully
definite
that fixes
difficulty
it.
with feeling. And my relation to reality was not particularly brilliant.
So he's calling himself a creative. Think of the artist, the person that's kind of in their own world. That's the kind of person Jung is. And if you've read any of his writing, you can clearly see that this is the case. You can clearly see that, as much of a doctor he is, he's also that much of a master of creative impulse.
I was often at variance with the reality of things. Now that gives you all the necessary data for the diagnosis.
During the 1930s, when you were working a lot with German patients, you did, I believe, forecast that a Second World War was very likely. Well, now, looking at the world today, do you feel that a Third World?
He had visions of, so the story wasn't told right. Basically, Jung, you may call it insanity, you may call it psychosis. I think it's a tricky thing to define, but basically, at one point in his life, after he broke away from Freud, he went through various personal struggles and kind of had to rebuild himself from scratch. And through the course of this, he experienced a kind of delirium for 5 years. And in this delirium, he saw visions of World War II. Jung was somebody who had premonitions all the time. Like there's several cases where he was working on a dream of his patients and he couldn't discover what the root of it was, and he had a dream that helped him discover what the other person's dream was about. And it's like that's a level of intuition that you would expect out of a psychic, out of a soothsayer. And it just goes to show that this guy was like so much beyond just that. I don't know. It to me, he seems more of a mystic than anything, and he kind of dresses up his writing and his teachings as science, but it to me it kind of blurs the lines.
World War is likely.
I have no definite indications in that respect. But there are so many indications that one doesn't know what one sees. Is it trees or is it the wood? It's very difficult to say because the dreams of people's dreams contain apprehensions, you know. But it is very difficult to say whether they point to a war.
So I mean, this is 59, so this is during the Cold War, I guess. I don't know if there's an official date of the Cold War. I'm not like a history buff, but there was stuff going on for sure,
Because that idea is uppermost in
like
people's
posturing
mind.
and that kind of stuff.
Formerly, you know, it has.
You can even make an argument that there's a lot of like proxy wars that basically were part of the Cold War. And I mean, can you really even attribute those? Because like, say you hire a consultant to do your dirty work, it's that kind of thing. It's like you have plausible deniability, so what can you even really say?
Been much simpler. People didn't think of a war, and therefore it was rather clear what the dreams meant. Nowadays, no more so. We are so full of apprehensions, fears, that one doesn't know exactly to what it points. But one thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain.
Why?
Because we need more. We need more psychology. We need more understanding.
I wonder, see, I feel like Jung would see the modern state of psychology, and I feel like he'd be very taken aback with the way it's gone. Um, I think every sort of science has its faults nowadays, but I just think there's too much money to be made off of it, and you know, it's you know, it's like how lawyers do all these games and charge people more, and charge people for phone call. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, does the person benefit from you getting better? No, they make more money the more you see them. So, there's this like I think there's a lot of people that kind of take advantage of these systems and kind of use it to forget why they're doing it. Like there's far too little people that actually want to help others and kind of want to just inflate their ego. Um, and there's all sorts of other issues when it comes to psychology as well. But that's a topic for.
Of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it.
So he's almost giving like a warning to the world right here. The only danger is man itself. He is the danger. And what he's saying is individuals that don't have the capacity to recognize their capacity for evil are the danger. The utilitarians, the people that have the ends justify the means, the people that want more resources, the people that will go to whatever cost to put themselves ahead of others. And it's like there's really two types of evil in this world. There's like the evil that's just like I hate to say it, but like natural, like an animal takes out another animal for the sake of survival. Like there's just like these more like primitive impulses, taking someone out and taking their resource, like just that kind of evil, like senseless violence. And then there's the Machiavellian form of evil, the people that orchestrate things, the people that set up wars, the people that instigate things and do things for the quote unquote greater good to protect our interests. We 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 do a war because we know that this country has weapons that are very dangerous and we must prevent them from being used against us. Like that kind of stuff. Like that's really that more elevated, more strategic side of evil, and that's what he's warning you about. Because if you don't understand you can be bad as well, if you always point the finger to others, then you can never curtail your more negative impulses. You can never, control the aspects of yourself that you otherwise want to control. Like, have you ever seen somebody that gets very angry very quickly? Or is that a person that you want to be around? Is that a person that even understands that they have an issue? Versus a person that knows they have a short temper, so whenever they feel overwhelmed, they remove themselves from the situation. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you can't solve the problem before you know about the problem. And that's really what he's talking about here.
We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied because we are the origin of all coming evil.
Well, does man
And what he's saying, we are the origin of all coming evil. Like, again, it's not pointing the finger because the Jungian psychology basically states that all of your problems are your own. All of your problems are your inability to deal with the things that have happened to you, deal with the traumas and overcome them and face them. Because a big part of Jung's psychology is that if you don't face your fears today, they're going to come back tomorrow and they're going to be even stronger. And that's really more or less what he's saying. It's like you have to confront the things that you've been avoiding. You have to confront those tasks or those things or those aspects of yourself that you've been pushing to the side. And if you don't, they're going to come back and ruin your life in unforeseen ways. And sooner or later you're going to face that. I guess we call it Judgment Day, but like, just think of it like karma. Like, if you just avoid it, it's going to, in the end, come back. It's always going to be something you struggle with. It's always going to be something you deal with.
Do you think need to have the concept of sin and evil to live with? Is this part of our nature?
Well, obviously.
And of a redeemer?
So what he's saying is, it's obvious that sin is just human nature because if there wasn't sin, if there was so like the origins of the word sin just means to misstep. I think we have it very mixed up, and I think we have it very, kind of convoluted into something that's bad. I don't necessarily believe that it's bad to do something wrong. I think it's if you continue to do it, if you don't move forward, if you don't in any way reconcile it, if you don't in any way make amends to it, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a much healthier and more beneficial way to approach when you do something wrong or when you do something that you're not proud of. And really what Jung's saying here is that, like, without this misstep, without this failure, without this, bad act, you can't correct your behavior. And in fact, it makes everything worthwhile because if you were perfect every day long, like all day, every day, you would eventually become bored. It's the missteps, it's the ebb and the flows that give any sort of meaning or purpose to life. If you win the lottery today, it's not going to mean as much as if you made the same money after working for years upon years upon years upon years, working as hard as you can, and then eventually getting to that mountaintop. That's really the depth of what he just said.
That is an inevitable consequence.
This is not a concept which will disappear as we become more rational. It's something which
Well,
is deep-seated.
I don't believe that man ever will deviate uh, from the original pattern of his being.
So I think you may like how do I say this? Like, what Jung's saying is that you never evolve past programming. Like, we think we're more advanced, we think we're beyond things, but like even people that have completely gone away from faith, even people that call themselves atheists or call themselves whatever ism you call yourself, you just replace it with something new. Like, the atheists believe in atheism as much as the religious people believe in, their religion. The you know people that are obsessed with politics, the people that are obsessed with capitalism or communism, it's the same thing. You just replace these idols with new idols, and some are more pure than others, some are more beneficial than others. Like, there's certain symbols that are guiding you to positivity, and there's certain symbols that are guiding you to negativity, and it's important to recognize these things. And I think this is really the danger of this is really what Nietzsche's talking about when he talks about God is dead, that the old symbols are decaying and they're being destroyed and they're being replaced with lesser symbols, such as, various movements of the 20th century that caused all of these wars, the Reagan sort of idea of things, even like this movement to like this mythic idea of the 50s in America. I think it's very hilarious to believe that, like, in the 1950s everything was perfect and everything was great. Sure, there was probably some aspects that were okay. Sure, there was probably some aspects that were good, but it's like, I don't, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, it's like we're never gonna get to this idealized version of ourselves, like, of our society. And even if we get close, there's still gonna be a whole lot of problems. And it's weird to me that, like, we live in a world that, like, people believe that if everything went according to my way of things, that things would just happen perfectly. That it's never gonna happen. Maybe they could be better. Maybe things would improve, but like, to say that there wouldn't be also other negative causes that came from your way of, like, it's very weird how idealistic people are in a world that, like, tries to strip down idealism. And it's a very, like, the more I've noticed it, the more I try to curtail my own idealism and put things in perspective and be more realistic about things.
There will always be such ideas. For instance, uh, if you do not directly believe in a personal redeemer, as it was the case with Hitler, or uh, the hero worship in Russia, then it is an idea. It is a symbolic idea.
You have
Again, think of how groups are guided by this like image, and like to an outsider it doesn't mean anything, but to an insider it's everything. Look at the groups that you're part of, and look about how people in your group are guided to that same ideal. That's really what he's saying. It's like human beings have not really evolved past that, and it's just the recognition of that and the understanding of that allows you to not be taken for a loop.
written at one time and another some sentences which have surprised me a little about death. Now, in particular, I remember you said that death is psychologically just as important as birth, and like it, it's an integral part of life. But surely it can't be like birth if it's an end, can it?
Yes, if it's an end. And there we are not quite certain about this end. Because, you know, there are these peculiar faculties of the psyche that
So what he's saying is death is as important as birth, because death is what gives us, as Kierkegaard said, the anxiety to go out into the world and do anything, the need to live, the need to get out of bed in the morning. Like, let's say you live forever. If you live forever, maybe it would be cool, maybe it would be nice, but like you'd have no urgency. There would be no reason to do anything today because you can do it tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next day, and the next day. But like when we face our own mortality, that's when we can start to come to grips with things, start to evolve, start to take on a more natural progression of life, and go through the different stages of life. You know, if you're young forever, then you would never be forced to rely more on your faculties. You never be forced to teach the next generation of people lessons and the experiences that you had. Like, there's all these important stages that without death, they're not going to happen. They're not going to be spurred on.
it isn't entirely confined to space and time. You can have dreams or visions of the future. You can see round corners and such things. Only ignorance deny these facts. It's quite evident that they do exist and have existed always. Now these facts show that the psyche, in part at least, is not dependent upon these confinements. And then what? When the psyche is not under that obligation to live in time and space alone, and obviously it doesn't.
Talking about like, so when you're asleep, your mind is still active. So it's like, do you even need to be awake to be alive? Is really what he's saying. That's kind of the idea of what he's saying. Or do you live on in the collective memory of people? Do your experiences in some way add to this collective unconscious? Like, these are just ideas he's putting forward, but he's not making a blank.
Then, to that extent, the psyche is not submitted to those laws. And that means
I'm convinced Jung believes in a monad, though. So I think he's dancing around the idea that like you become part of universal consciousness. I think he is of the belief that everything is one consciousness, everything is one derivation of universal thought forms, or whatever you want to call it. He was very into alchemy. He was very into Gnosticism, and you know, if you read the Red Book, you'll get really into that stuff. I don't know if I agree with it, but it's certainly an interesting way to think about things.
practical in, continuation of life, of a sort of psychical existence beyond time and space.
Do you yourself believe that death is probably the end, or do you believe that...
Well, I can't say. You see, the word belief is a difficult thing for me. I don't believe. I must have a reason for a certain hypothesis. Either I know a thing, and when I know it, I don't need to believe it. If I don't allow myself, for instance, to believe a thing just for the sake of believing it. I can't believe it. But when there are sufficient reasons for a certain hypothesis, I shall accept it.
So I don't necessarily agree with this. Like, and this is what Kierkegaard is very famously his idea of the leap of faith, which is that there's things beyond reason there's things beyond our control and beyond our observation, and we just have to have faith in them. We just have to accept them. And the book he talks about this most is Fear and Trembling, where he talks about Adam, or no, not Adam. The fuck is his name? Um, Abraham. He talks about Abraham. I was blanking for so long, but he talks about Abraham and how Abraham was basically about to sacrifice Isaac, and why that was the greatest devotion to God, and why that was one of the greatest acts of humanity, because he had faith. He didn't even doubt. He didn't even question. Like, he was willing to forego all of his morality because he had that much faith in God, and that sort of idea. But really, I think that is essential, like belief in the idea before it's present, because I don't think it's possible to be creative without it. Now, perhaps Young is just arguing semantics here. Perhaps he's just saying something in a manner that I don't quite like in this context. But to me, I don't necessarily agree with what he's saying.
reasons, naturally, and should say we have to reckon with the possibility of so and so, you know.
Well, now, you've told us that we should regard death as being a goal,
Yes,
and that to shrink away from it is to evade life and make
yes,
life purposeless.
yes.
So what he's saying is, imagine like uh, I don't know if people have seen Seinfeld, but there's an episode of Seinfeld where there's like he's known as the Bubble Boy, very sickly guy, and he's stuck in a bubble. But like, obviously, if you have health conditions, don't don't listen to what I'm saying. But basically, if you sit inside and hide from life the entire time, then you miss the point. Like, death is supposed to inspire you to live life. It's not supposed to make you sit back and be afraid of it, because if your fear of death keeps you from living, then you're already dead.
What advice would you give to people in their later life to enable them to do this when most of them must in fact believe that death is the end of everything?
Well, you see, I have treated many old people, and it's quite interesting to watch what the unconscious is doing with the fact that it is apparently threatened with a complete end. Uh, it disregards it. Life behaves as if it were going on. And so I think it is better for old people to live on, to look.
And it's like, it's just, Seneca said something beautiful. It's that as he grows older, as every day goes on, his days become more valuable because he has less of them. So he's more and more gracious every single day.
Forward to the next day, as if he had to spend centuries. And then he lives properly. But when he is afraid, when he doesn't look forward, he looks back, he petrifies, he gets stiff, and he dies before his time. But when he is living on, looking forward to the great adventure that is ahead, then he lives.
So, like, the people that, to me, at least the people in my life that have lived the longest, are the people that do things, not the people that are shut in, people that sit inside all day. It's the people that once they retire, they kept going. And you hear stories all the time of like people retiring, and then a year later, or 6 months later, however long, like they just pass away. And it's because they stopped doing things, they stopped living. And it's a very sad thing to see, but it's like, if you want a long life, enjoy your life. It's really as simple as that.
And that is
Obviously, you can't control like if you get in a car accident, but we're going off the assumption that's not the case.
about what the unconscious is intending to do. Of course, it's quite obvious that we are all going to die, and this is the sad finale of everything. Um, but nevertheless, there is something in us that doesn't believe.
I don't think it's necessarily sad. I mean, I guess you could say it's sad, like, oh, things are gonna end, but like it is what it is. Like, everyone in history has died. Why am I why am I better? Why am I more important? And it's like, the more you come to grips with your own mortality, the more you're able to live your life. Um, think about how many people that live their lives in fear of how others judge them. Think about how many people live their lives in fear of what others will say about them. And in the end, like every problem you have is going to disappear one day. There's gonna be a day and age where you're no longer here, and it's like, did you make the most of your time when you were here? Did you live your life without regrets? Because once it's said and done, it's said and done. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to look back and be disappointed. I don't want to be on my deathbed saying that, why didn't I go after? Why didn't I try more? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And that's, I wouldn't say I'm afraid of it, but like that to me would be a failure in my eyes.
Believe it, apparently. But this is merely a fact, a psychological fact. Uh, doesn't mean to me that it proves something. It is simply so. For instance, I may not know why we need salt, but we prefer to eat salt too, because you feel better. And so when you think in a certain way, you may feel considerably better. And I think if you think along the lines of nature, then you think properly.
And this leads me to the last question that I want to ask you.
Dude, it looks like he aged like 20 years when it switched camera angles. He
As
looks
the
like,
world
obviously he looks old, but when it switched camera angles, he looked ancient.
becomes more technically efficient, it seems increasingly necessary for people to behave communally and collectively. Now, do you think it's possible that the highest development of man may be to submerge his own individuality in a kind of collective consciousness?
That's hardly possible. I think there will be a reaction. A reaction will set in against this communal dissociation. You know, man doesn't stand forever his nullification. Once there will be a reaction, and I see it setting in. You know, when
So you can apply Jungian psychology. So what he's saying here is not getting to a point very quickly, so I'm gonna stop it. But what he's saying here is that, or not what he's saying here, but the most interesting aspect that I see of Jungian psychology is that you can apply it not just to the individual, but also in mass. So like any sort of large sweeping political movement is really just a response to the opposite side doing the opposite thing. Newton was onto something with his laws of physics. I mean, obviously he was onto something, but like for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. I think that explains groups of people. I think that explains politics. I think that explains how people respond and react to uh, things in mass. You could put this on the individual. You could put it that, as a kid, Napoleon was bullied for his height, so he had to make up for that with great military success. Like, you could put that just purely on the individual. You could put that onto a society that, like, France was in such political turmoil and all these other things and experienced such hardship that when a really strong ruler came to power, Napoleon was able to take over and was able to galvanize these people who had become hopeless and despised the government and all these things and were just united behind him. Like there's all these different applications of it. I think that's to me some of the most fascinating things to just see the bigger picture with stuff, see where things are heading. Like you're seeing a huge change in trends right now, especially in the US. I think things are shifting back to a more Reagan style of government, and there'll be some bad with it, there'll be some good with it. But overall, it's just going to be like that for 20 years and then go back to the other. Like it's just everything is in cycles, everything ebbs and flows. And, as Heraclitus said, you can never step in the same river twice.
I think of my patients, they all seek their own existence and to assure their existence against that complete atomization into nothingness or into meaninglessness. Man cannot stand a meaningless life.
Man cannot stand a meaningless life. Damn. Nietzsche said something. It was along the lines of give a man a why and he can endure pretty much anyhow. I think that states what this is trying to say. Like, if you have purpose, then you have a reason to go on, you have a reason to push on. But if there's no purpose behind the madness, if there's no bigger picture, then it's difficult to stay in the fire. It's difficult to face the realities of life on a daily basis and see all of the disasters and see all of the negative stuff and persist. Right. That was Jung. What time is it? 11:21. How long have you been streaming for? Stream for 34 minutes. I'm just gonna end it now so I can wake up and stream again in the morning. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. I told you guys I would finish this, so I finished it. Love you guys. Peace out.